So the New York Times has an interesting article out. Vote for Biden. Many Bernie voters say it's up in the air. I would say for many of us, it's not up in the air. The answer is just basically no. But I asked myself, and I'm going to go through various parts of this article because the article is great. It makes me realize, yeah, how I feel about this. I'm not necessarily alone in this. Now, I know this because I have a channel, but to run this article and you get to see some of the quotes and everything else, many of the things that we've talked about just on this particular channel are things that other people basically are saying themselves and that they were perfectly willing to have a conversation and tell the New York Times. Loved it. I thought to myself, what does Joe Biden have to do to get my vote? Now, here's the catch. Libertarians they have an argument that lefties sometimes don't necessarily like to engage, where they make the case that says taxes is basically always taken at the barrel of a gun. Meaning, at the end of a long, circuitous bureaucratic process, there is a man who is going to come to your house, say bad things to you, and drag you to jail and put you into a cage. Now, that's not for everybody, because there's some people who, for the most part, agree with the notion that, look, if we have a society, we got to pay for the society. Just kind of comes along with the territory. But for that small percentage of libertarians that runs with this notion that taxes is a death, I think that's lunaticish, but whatever. For them, that is true. There'll be many people who agree. For everyone else, there's a consequence. Beyond this point of consequence and the consequence being required in order to compel action for people who don't necessarily agree with you, especially if there's a countervailing incentive for them to take behavior that is adverse to the things that you yourself believe in. Consequence is just one of those things that is required. It's kind of baked into reality of sorts. Beyond this point, this notion of unions. Lefties love unions. Lefties love unions. You better not cross that picket line. You don't want to be a scab. There's a protest that's taking place in one of the McDonald's. Now, I like unions too. Personally, I think I like worker co-ops more, or public ownership more. But outside of that, in regards to private enterprise, yeah, I think a union is a countervailing necessary or necessity in regards to a competitive process between two inequitable powers, meaning the management and the ownership class versus the people who work at that particular company. I don't understand how lefties love unions so much, but are so willing to just acquiesce with the Democratic Party. Meaning, your political process is every bit as much as a competitive negotiation as a union. In this particular case, you're a candidate. We had a somewhat of a soft powder puff primary where one guy was willing to say whatever he needed to say to get elected when the other guy was not even the very basic necessity of things to say to get elected because he didn't want to jostle his buddy. And so all of these other big existential political priorities mattered less than him and his friendships with Joe Biden, and didn't have the honesty to engage that and deal with that, ultimately coming away with, I wouldn't do anything different in this regard. Or have no regrets. You should have plenty of regrets, buddy. But nevertheless, you are now in an inequitable distribution of power regarding who is going to win the primary process versus your agency that's left over in this process. I would make the point to you that over the last 40, 50 years, the left, for the most part, has been hit over the head with this notion of you have nowhere else to go, you can't elect, Republicans get elected, and all of this other stuff, and have acquiesced. And in acquiescing, pretty much gave over any and all notion of standing up for any level of policy priorities. And then turned around and shocked and complained that they were being taken advantage of or they were being talked down to. And this last election, despite the fact that you've used that argument as a reason to effectively give over all of these policy priorities, all of these big cosmic philosophical responsibilities that you're stuck with just because you're one of those people that care about the larger world, you were willing to give all of those things over out of cowardice and fear, meaning treating each individual specific election as if it wasn't something within the context of time, but as if everything mattered in that one specific election. And despite that, you still lost. Meaning, despite giving over everything that you believed in, you still end up losing in one election after the next. Gore lost, Kerry lost, Clinton lost. And yeah, aside from something that may take association with the coronavirus, where Trump goes along with this particular cynical policy of trying to force people back to work and a large number of people dying, all things being equal, Joe Biden will probably also lose. He is a weaker, cognitively challenged candidate, even to the less than Hillary Clinton. And he seems to have even less enthusiasm. So, all things being equal, I think Biden loses. My point is a little different, though. The Democratic Party was willing for Biden to lose if it meant stopping you. Who else in the party sops up the black vote? By the same token, the guy who's being accused of rape, the guy who, for the most part, has a grifting family, meaning you can't even call Trump corrupt because you yourself are stuck with that particular, that stigma. This guy is one of the weakest candidates that you could put up against Trump, but he will most likely get bullied. That was baked into the cake. It was already understood. The thing that gave the con away, because you can make a case, no, Biden is somehow going to beat Trump like a drum. I don't see it, but you can make that case. The problem is when you're on the debate stage and they ask, who is willing to go to a brokered convention if it means ripping the nomination out of Sanders' hands? Meaning if Sanders gets more delegates, which of you on the stage would be willing to go to a brokered convention and try to rip that away from him? All of them understands that means they would lose the race to Trump, because there is no Sanders supporter worth their salt that is going to turn around after something like that happens and vote for their candidate. They know it. They didn't care. My point is, it mattered to them more than stopping Sanders from owning the party for a generation as opposed to Trump for winning another 4 years. You need to engage politics in a similar fashion. We are not on the same page. That party lined up ideologically entirely against everything, all of our policy priorities. And beyond that point, not just slandered and attacked the candidate, but also went to us and treated us as if we were Trump supporters. Why? Because we've acquiesced for so long that the belief is they're going to back us regardless of what we do. They're terrified of who Republicans are, and because of such, it does not matter who we put up. Joe Biden can be our guy, and you're still going to get the majority of people to still back Joe Biden. Now, 15% is going to go to Trump, apparently. I think it was around 13% that went to Trump last time. You're going to have many that go to Green Party, such as myself, or third party. And you're going to have many that sit home and don't vote. Those numbers would be disastrous if Joe Biden was trying to win this election. What would it take to get you to vote for Joe Biden? I thought about it, and the answer came pretty straightforward. There's certain problems with believing anything Joe Biden said, because Joe Biden is a flagrant liar, whether it's on Social Security, whether it's on Mandela, whether it's on civil rights, whether it's on his Iraq war vote. Joe Biden flagrantly lied throughout this entire contest. And again, when I make the point that this was barely a competition because the other candidate barely even mentioned the fact that the guy was lying or that the guy was unelectable. Yes, I have complicated feelings about 2020, especially with Sanders. My only basic point is, Joe Biden lied flagrantly in this election. So anything that Joe Biden says has to be taken with a severe grain of salt. But assuming for the moment that wasn't true. Assuming for the moment that there was some way to make it ironclad where you could get this kind of Harry Potter-esque pact of steel thing where the person would die if they didn't necessarily go through with the policy proposals. Yeah, under that scenario, there are ways that Joe Biden can get my vote. Very basic. Do your job and sell out to us, the American public. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. We are going to have contributor appreciation this evening at around 5 o'clock, maybe 5:30 if I have one more video that I want to do before then. But that will be today, so definitely stay tuned for that. We usually get a lot of good energy, and a lot of people tend to enjoy us covering various topics. Mrs. Thomas and I, she'll be joining me. I've been thinking heavily about 2020. Like, severely so, because my feelings for 2020 set. In 2016, I went with the Green Party, but I was skittish on that because it was the first election where that's not true. I voted for Nader. But beyond that point, I was in the camp of, yeah, you cheated my guy, and because you cheated my guy, there's no way I can vote for you. It's almost like it forbids me to vote for you just on the principle of it. You know, what kind of government, what kind of even faux democracy do you have in a situation where they can flagrantly cheat a guy, and then you turn around and support the people who did it? You basically incentivize that cheating taking place again. Even if it means they lose, that's more important. I hope you understand what I mean. There's some things that go beyond just this notion of kowtowing and cowardice. in a particular political position. There are some things that matter more, especially if you're looking at elections over the course of time, and you need to have a certain degree of legitimacy in any leverage that you are going to bear in the political space. What will not get people to back your candidate is basically telling them to back your candidate. Listen to the quotes from some of the Sanders supporters in the New York Times. If you want their support, they're telling you very clear how to get it. What it feels like is the Democratic Party relies on guilting progressives into voting for them, and they don't want to have any meaningful changes, said Mrs. Shipp, a nursing student in Milwaukee. For the third election in a row, to have a candidate you're not excited about makes me a little more interested in voting third party. Maybe you should vote third party. Maybe you should. And what indication would he get across to the Democratic Party? We don't particularly like this candidate. If this person can't win and it continues to lose. With one caveat I would add. You need to be loud about it. It's not an issue of them guilting you into anything. And the guilt is something that you yourself feel about this. You shouldn't feel guilt at all. What you should feel about is, goddamn right we made them lose, and we will continue to make them lose until they tout certain policies. One is a position of strength. The other one is a position of just patheticness. No offense. Just making the point. Stand by your strength in this process. If indeed they're saying that your vote matters so much that that person lost, own it, accept it, and consider that to be somewhat leverage that you have in the political process when you're going forward. I say the same thing is true about Joe Biden. If Joe Biden is not willing to go for the basic policies that the American public goes for, and he wants to run a campaign, let Joe Biden and his octogenarians and septuagenarians get him elected. Don't be a part of that process. Why incentivize your own, A, being taken advantage of, but B, also why incentivize your policies never getting a hearing or never getting dealt with, despite the fact that at this point, your policies are popular. You won the ideological argument. Your candidate was just too weak. Let's keep going. There's more. In interviews with 24 Sanders primary voters across the country this week, there was a nearly universal lack of enthusiasm for Mr. Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee. Some called him a less formidable candidate than Hillary Clinton in 2016. Many were skeptical of his ability to beat Trump. Others were quick to critique his incoherent speech. No, cognitive difficulties. His cognitive difficulties. Call it what it is. Now, their issue is, how are they going to show up for Biden in November if these people are this unenthusiastic for him? 15% said they'd vote for Trump, the same share as in 2016. Taewon Thorne, 24, it's up in the air whether he would vote. A Sanders supporter who recently moved to New York City from Pennsylvania, where he registered to vote, said, if I happen to be near my polling place, I'd vote for Biden, but I'm not very enthusiastic about him whatsoever. If I'm in the area, he'll get my vote. If he's in the area. Some Sanders supporters said they would like a third-party candidate. A few said they would vote for Trump, and some were wavering about voting at all. Daniel Ray, 27, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, planned to write in Tulsi Gabbard. And other Facebook groups, Sanders supporters were cynical about the olive branches of policy that Biden has offered to progressives. You should be. Why would you expect anything in a process where they believe you have no power and no clout? Politics is not about giving you anything. I hope you understand what I mean. It's about what you can take and what you have leverage to effectively utilize. That has become clear as day in 2020. If that's not clear to you in 2020, it never will be. If we don't declare a movement that this isn't good enough, Mr. Kesslering said, referring to Mr. Biden's moderate policies, then the Democratic Party has every right to ignore us. Right there, right there. I hate the idea of Donald Trump being president for another term, but if that's what we need to do to make these people take us seriously, then that's what needs to be done. Right there, right there, right there. I hope you understand the first part. This is not a weak position. Look at what he said. They have every right to ignore us. Oh, I love that. Fucking love that. His basic point is, look, if you're not willing to have some level of courage in the political process and say, we're not willing to go beyond this point, meaning, again, unions. What do you think unions strike? They strike because they say we're not willing to go beyond this point. Yes, you fuck us over constantly, but even to this degree of fucking over, this degree is too much. And we're willing to jeopardize the company and jeopardize the profits, jeopardize our wages. We're willing to tank it all if it means that we need to have a hearing on this. His point is the Democratic Party has every right. Because again, politics is not about giving you anything. It's about what you have the leverage to basically win, or what you have the leverage to impel upon your enemy to effectively force from him. In this very specific case, they have every right, meaning we legitimize us being taken advantage of. If you effectively, for the next, again, vote for the random hack that they put up that in no way supports your policy agenda. Yes. Kesslering, fucking A. Kesslering. You're onto something, buddy. You're onto something. I like this guy. I like this guy a lot. I'll vote for him. Biden is better than Trump. Sure, said Stephen Phillips, who lives in Lakeland, Florida, but he cringed watching Mr. Sanders' live stream endorsement of Mr. Biden on Monday when his senator spoke extemporaneously while the former vice president seems to be reading off of cue cards. Nothing that anybody said here was wrong. Meaning they weren't lying. They were just being honest. This is what the Sanders base looks like when engaging Biden. My point to you is you incentivize this behavior by acquiescing to basically a candidate that in no way backs your policy priorities and in the middle of a pandemic said he would literally veto Medicare for all if it got passed. That's astonishing. Not to mention the party itself was literally willing to lose to Trump if it meant stopping Sanders from taking it for a generation. You need to internalize that. There is a significant level of hatred in that. And it makes the point that you're not on the same team and you need to stop thinking of yourself as such. Sanders abandoning everything and the policy agenda that he believed in. But that's on Sanders. I'm backing this because of policy, not because of any particular candidate. The moment that the candidate abandons those policy agendas, I abandon the candidate. It's not personal. Love him for what he's done, but at this point, it's time to let him go. These lefties need to be able to come together and speak in unison and say, this is what we want. Not with just 15% doing that. I'm talking about a majority. Nothing that you want to get done from a policy priority would ever get done as long as you are willing to acquiesce in this way. And it's not enough for one or two people to do it. It's talking about something that requires millions all across the country. Hell, even in the various states that are required to get elected. The Democratic Party may be okay with Joe Biden losing, but is Joe Biden okay with himself losing? And that's the catch. And that's your pressure point. That's your leverage. This is what we want. We're not willing to accept anything else, and you will lose if you don't toe this agenda. And let them test you. If Joe Biden wants to win, Joe Biden, listen to these supporters. Very easy. Sell out. Sell out to the American public. I am not asking for anything that the American public doesn't already agree or that is popular. Meaning, if I'm saying Medicare for all, or getting rid of student debt, or expanding Social Security, or increasing the minimum wage, or increasing the wealth tax, or dealing with the criminal justice system, or for that matter, even dealing with the electoral system, none of those things are unpopular. All of those things, none of those things are wedge issues. Those things, are, for the most part, are popular, especially within the context of the Democratic Party, the party that you're supposed to be running in. If you want to unify the Democratic Party, it is very easy. You're not going to lose your elderly base by taking on those policies, meaning the only thing that you have to lose is basically the younger voter share. If you wanted to win, this is your pathway to do it. You can play two-level politics here. You can assume that Donald Trump is going to be so atrocious that there's going to be large amount of loss of life as a result of policies that Donald Trump is pushing forward, so you don't have to give anything, that the public would just put you in just based on the loss of life that they attribute to Donald Trump's policies. I mean, you can look at what he's doing. It's pretty cynical, right? We're going to give people $1,200. How people are going to live $1,200. We're going to extend the time in which they get that check. And now you have a situation where people who live paycheck to paycheck don't have the capacity to work. You have, 20 million people, half of Los Angeles, losing their jobs. Many of these people are out here protesting, not entirely because they want to be out there protesting. They may use this notion of liberty and everything else, but those people are just broke and poor. Some of them are. Some of them are Trump supporters. Some of them are paying attention to Fox News. Some of them are business owners. But you also have a share of those people that just don't have a paycheck coming. Cynical politics. You can be Joe Biden and the Democratic Party and say, well, they're going to lose anyway, because all of those people protesting and all of those people out pushing to try to open up the governments and everything else is going to create a large loss of life in those particular areas, and that loss of life is going to be attributed to the Republican Party. We don't have to give anything in this process. The number of people that die as a result of Trump's action is going to be blamed on Trump. Ergo, they're going to put me in that office regardless. You can play politics that way. I mean, that's assuming that Trump doesn't take a U-turn, which he may and can do in regards to the context of the election. Or you can play politics in a way where you shamelessly devote it to wanting to get elected, and in doing so, you shamelessly sell out to basically to America. The problem here is Joe Biden is a flagrant liar. So what Joe Biden says can't necessarily be believed. I'll end this here. We have a show coming up for contributor appreciation, so definitely stay tuned for that. Nina Turner has a really good video, and I play this because Nina Turner is right here. But everything that Nina Turner says has to have a consequence associated with it. Just to take this back to the beginning in order to dovetail. Unless there's a consequence, then none of this matters. Your demands don't matter if there's no consequence backing those demands. This is kind of why I made the argument about taxes. It's the same thing in regards to even unions for that matter. If you have no capacity to discharge a consequence, then your demands don't matter, especially when there are incentives pulling people into other directions that you don't necessarily want them to go. But what she's saying here is what I've said. Pick 4 or 5 policies and say this is no longer a race to the bottom. You're not getting our support without these policies. Now, I don't know how far she wants to go with this, but the reason I said 4 or 5 policies is because it gets rid of this class stuff. Policy stuff or political party stuff. You can be a Republican and latch on to those policies. It's not anything around those policies other than trying to get those policies accomplished. The number of people and the more the people that you have pushing on the political space increases your chances of getting those policies accomplished because it increases your leverage on that political space. You don't have to be in a political party in this case. This can be a human rights movement for all that I care. I'm making the point that there are various policies that the American public largely agrees with, and within the context of those policies, we can come together and push for those ideas, making the argument that you don't get elected without kowtowing to this. Now, they may test you, in which case they lose, but they may test you again. But here's the thing, when you have a large organization of people like that, if you look back over time, either the Russian Revolution, hell, even in China right now, in Hong Kong, those people begin to be something. Meaning, the moment that you have a large aggregation of people who are coming together under the context of policy like that, those people start to become something in and of themselves, meaning they start to get a neural center. It's almost like an accretion disk. So, yeah, I am on board for this notion of people coming together under this notion of policy and eventually feeling their way out in regards to what they want to be. If that becomes a political party, great. If that becomes something that pressures to the point of being able to leverage the political space, then great. Whatever that is, it should be grotesquely adversarial in getting its policy agenda accomplished. It should wake up in the morning trying to figure out how. It should go to bed at night trying to figure out how. And it should be willing to put a knife and do whatever is necessary to get those agenda accomplished. That's how I feel about politics. To me, it's a game, space, and a competition like anything else. Let's hear Turner.
The progressive movement needs to be more nimble. We need to coalesce. We need to forge a pact with one another of those things that we solidly agree on and make our demands as a group. We have to be as agile as the moderates, as agile as the corporatists. And we also need to understand a truth that Brother Frederick Douglass articulated in his time. It is still true today, and I'm sure generations before him said the same thing, which is power concedes nothing without a struggle. It concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. Now, I'm paraphrasing him, but that is true. And so the progressive movement, we must understand, although our ideas are the best. Yes, I said that. They are the best. Some people may disagree. They're wrong. Our ideas are the best. You can have the best ideas, the best intentions. You can have moral clarity. You can have righteous indignation. You can have all of those things, but you must get the power. And power plus moral clarity, power plus the best intention, power plus righteous indignation gets us the change that we need.
Yes. When Martin Luther King was dragged into the jail and he had cops and dogs trying to bite him and whatnot and scaring the shit out of him. And he comes out and he basically says, this is what I must do for my people. Now, clearly he doesn't want to be there. Clearly none of those people who are on those buses or who are marching or who are getting beat and hit by cops, I don't even think those cops probably want to be there. But they're there because they realize that all level of struggle has a cost and a penalty associated with it in trying to change things from the way they are to something else. And doing the same thing that you've always done for the last 40, 50 years that has gotten you no results. In fact, has moved the country further and further to the right. I understand the cowardice associated with this particular position. I'm making the point that pulling back from that for the moment and analyzing what took place in 2020 and the level that the Democratic Party was willing to go in order to stop your guy, it is time to do something different. They were willing to lose. This is not each and every random run-of-the-mill Democrat. That's not what that is. But you must understand that as long as they're in the party with this incrementalism stuff, it makes it harder for your case to get aired. If you were around the time doing FDR or even John F. Kennedy, and you make this argument about the government can do X or the government can do Y, the population may agree, because I can remember when we had NASA. I can remember when we built that rocket program. I can remember when the New Deal took place. I was here for that. But what happens when you go 40, 50 years and you have the government trying to build a Affordable Care Act, which is basically a giveaway to the health insurance companies, and they can't even get a website right? Like, what does that do for this argument of, hey, let's have these big structural policies where government takes over Medicare for all, or government gets rid of student debt, or government does this, or government does that? It weakens the argument. It makes the argument harder to see. One of the reasons that Sanders seems risky in this particular election had a lot to do with just relative distance between the other Democrats. It wasn't so much that he didn't have the better policies, he did. The issue was who was more electable, and who's electable is more of a popularity contest revolving around who those people think is just the most normal and natural politician. And within the context of that, everybody else was normal and natural, with the exception of Sanders, and to a lesser degree, Warren. Got to make that argument. He didn't want to make that argument. That's a separate thought. Turner is right here. Choose the policies that you agree with and stop the race to the bottom. I don't know how far Nina Turner goes with this. I don't know if she says, if they're not willing to toe a particular agenda and you have a mass movement behind you, then let them get elected on their own steam and work to make them lose to get across some level of political legitimacy. I don't know if she goes that far. That's more of me in the way of cutthroat politics. But that's the way I think politics runs. And I have a hard time accepting people who say politics doesn't run in that way. It is a demand. It isn't given. It's always taken. And it's always, for that matter, if you believe that the Democratic Party doesn't necessarily need an adversarial branch in order to give demands and enforce policies, then why are unions in existence? Why can't the capitalist class, in and of itself, for the most part, just be nice? Because that's not the way power distributions work. Power at a certain point tells itself that all the power that I've accrued is because of my own awesomeness and genius, and because of that, everything that I do is great. And it just so happens, entirely coincidentally, that the power just accrues more and more and more resources to itself. Whether that's in politics or whether that's in a capitalistic system, both of those things are relatively equal the same. I'm making the point that, the left does need to organize. Fuck the party stuff. Organize around the policy agenda that you agree with and that you guys can agree on, that gets the mass support of the population, and press and refuse to capitulate for something that is less than that policy agenda. At the very least, come up with some kind of negotiated settlement. But acquiescing and giving over the farm for nothing, that gets you rightfully taken advantage of. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks a lot.